Ken, good afternoon. How are you?
Hi, fine, thanks, John. Thanks for having me
good.
on.
Yeah, well, I'm very delighted to be speaking to you. So I have a bunch of questions I want to ask. We'll see if we have time to cover them, or maybe not. We'll see. So in fact, here's one I prepared earlier. My first science fiction books. Where are we? Can you see that? Okay. This was given to me. It's a Marks and Spencer's compendium from I don't know when, and it contains, amongst other things, 2001 and Day of the Triffids. And I'm curious, do you remember your first science fiction book, and how old might you have been at the time?
Right. Well, the first I must have read adventures, kids' adventures of one kind or another, or boys' adventure stories that were science fiction. But I never thought of them as anything particularly different. I suppose I may have read the ridiculous books, children's books about a character called Ken, who was a part of a generation of kids who could actually survive in vacuum because they were born in space. It was absurd. I probably read them and so on. But the first science fiction book that I read and that I understood was something different and set me off looking for more like this was Rocket to Limbo by Alan E. Nurse. And I was probably, 12 or 13 at the time.
Yeah.
Alan E. Nurse was an American writer, not one of the big names, but he was a significant writer. He wrote some highly engaging short stories and a number of novels, and several novels for young readers. They weren't like YA; they were what was then called juveniles, rather like model Heinlein's juveniles.
Yeah.
This story, Rocket to Limbo, has all the Golden Age stuff in it. It has psi powers. It has a generation ship. It has a lost colony. It has a star drive, an interstellar FTL drive.
Sounds like it's hitting all the high notes.
Yes, it did. And I looked for all his other books. Then I looked for more of the same. And I guess I came across Heinlein Juveniles and so on. In fact, I know I did Heinlein, James Blish, etc. And when I was old enough for the adult library, in later on in my teens, I worked my way through. Basically, I did the thing that every SF writer of a certain age will tell you, who's grew up in Britain, and that is look for the yellow-spined gallants.
Yes, indeed.
SF hardbacks. Worked my way through from Aldous to Zelazny, basically. So that's how I started reading science fiction.
I remember the yellow glow coming from the Gollancz corner of the library when I used to go with my old man when I was in must have been my early teens, probably at that. But they held no attraction to me because the covers were really boring to my eye, which is really silly. But I vaguely recall reading Jules Verne, and I think it must have been before 2001 and Day of the Triffids there I showed you, but I can't be certain of that. But I don't think my little head thought of those as being science fiction particularly. I mean, but things like Journey to the Centre of Earth and To the Moon and Back, or whatever it was called. But yes, we all have our genesis in science fiction. And I think your age was that old saw about the golden age of science fiction. The golden age is 12.
Yes.
Science fiction. I think that's certainly was true in my case. So I'm curious to know just a little bit about your writing background, if you don't mind. So were you a struggling author for some time before you were first published when Star Fraction came out, or was it sort of one and done? How challenging a process was that for you?
Well, like a lot of teenage readers of science fiction, and probably older, I got the idea of writing science fiction stories myself. I felt very proud that I had written 100 possible titles for science fiction short stories.
Okay.
And I would write a science fiction short story for English composition in exams and so on.
Actually, I did that, and I've completely forgotten about it. I totally ripped off a couple of Isaac Asimov short stories, and suitably reworded, but they were recognisably the same for English essays. I totally forgot about that until just now. That's my guilty confession, I guess. I suppose. Come and arrest me now.
Oh well, my stories were pretty bad. At least they weren't plagiarised.
Yeah. Fair enough. Busted.
The very first story I sent off to a science fiction magazine was, again, when I was either first year at university or last year at secondary school. And I forget what the title was, but the idea of the story was a space explorer who discovers an alien planet and sets up the invasion of this alien planet. And at the end of it, you find that the planet turns out to be Earth, which I sent off to New Worlds Quarterly and got a rejection slip from Hilary Bailey, which I was very proud of. Because I got my first rejection slip, you see. I don't know if I still have it. And thereafter, because I read so much science fiction, in fact, what I thought I wanted to be was a scientist. So I did zoology at university, postgraduate work in biomechanics. And every few years I would write a short story and type it up and send it off to whatever was available. I think I sent a couple of stories to Interzone and they got rejected. The last of these, which was written in the early 90s, was called 1989, spelled out like the title of the book. The idea of that was, I used to say that the best thing about that story was the title because it told you the whole story. In other words, the events of our 1989 happened in the world of Orwell's 1984. More recently, actually, I rewrote that story.
Okay.
And it has been published in Ian Waits's magazine, Parsec.
Okay.
And it's going to appear in a new collection or selection of my short stories, which is coming out hopefully this August in time for Worldcon.
Okay.
It's called A Jura for Julia, and it comes out from Newcon Press. There was all that, and to fill in a wee bit more background, I was at the same Greenock High School as Iain Banks, and we sort of bonded over our enjoyment of science fiction.
Right.
And we had a very stimulating English teacher, a lady called Joan Woods, who tried to set up a creative writing group, which ended up, of course, being a bunch of teenagers setting the world to rights and not doing much writing. Anyway, she introduced us to a lot of good literature and encouraged our attempts to write.
Well, thank goodness for Miss Woods.
Yes, indeed. We stayed friends with her all her life, really.
Oh, wow, fantastic.
Yeah. And Ian, as we all know, started writing seriously, more or less when he was a student, and was determined to be a writer when he grew up,
Yeah.
And I read his books. And after the second or third of his novels came out, a friend of mine, a mutual friend at the launch party, said that Ian was getting a bit tired of hearing about all the science fiction novels I was going to write.
Yeah.
So I thought, By this time I had very belatedly finished my MPhil thesis. I was working as a programmer, and in about 1987, I think it was, I started writing the star fraction. And first I wrote it by hand, then I typed it out, and then Ian passed on to me a word processor, I think it was a word processor on a computer as such, that he had outgrown, and I wrote the rest of it on this very basic computer with a very basic word processor.
Yeah.
And it went through a couple of drafts, and I sent a draft to Mick Cheetham, who was Ian's agent, and she's still my agent,
right?
Cheetham Associates. She sent me a postcard saying that she liked the story and the details and the dialogue, but she couldn't make sense of the plot. So that summer, we happened to be house sitting in London for a friend, and arranged to meet with Mick for lunch. And she took me out for lunch and said, "Look, MacLeod, if this was a film, what would it have on the poster?" And I said, "Well, it's about a man who gets killed and his gun goes on fighting." And she said, "Right, now go back and write that story." So I rewrote the star fraction, expanded it quite a bit, cut quite a bit, spent the next summer or the rest of that summer, I forget. Anyway, I spent a lot of time rewriting it, and I sent it off. And that would have been, I think, in 1994. And Mick took it round to John Jarrold, who was then the editor at Legend, and he more or less pounced on it. He fell for it right away, was very enthusiastic, and before I knew it, I had a 2-book contract.
Nice.
Yes. So I wrote my second novel, which you see the board behind me.
Yeah, Stone Canal. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm doing. I've got this propped up to hide the clutter of crates and general mess. Yes, so I wrote that over the next 18 months while still working as a programmer.
Yeah.
I think I finished the last chapters in a sort of mad overnighter and tottered into work the following day. The Star Fraction, the Star Fraction was launched at the 1995 Glasgow Worldcon.
Ah.
Yeah, there was
you're making an appearance there this year, I imagine.
Yes, well, I'm a guest of honour there.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, so hopefully this display board behind me is going to be there too.
Well, talking of the Full Revolution books, so I've read the main sequence, if that's the right term for it, but I haven't yet read the Sky Road, and I'm sort of vaguely aware that it's almost like an alternative sequel to the Star Fraction. But what's the point of divergence? Where does the history split?
The history splits where I think it is where Myra Godwin, who is a very minor character in the Stone Canal, she agrees to do a certain job for David Reed, I think.
Yeah.
The moment where the split happens is sort of telegraphed in the Sky Road. It is just a sort of alternate history, a branch history, and I mean I like the Sky Road. It's one of my novels that I do like.
All right, very good. And again, I'm just curious, been nosy. When you were writing the Star Fraction, were you thinking of it as a standalone book, singleton, or did you have in mind other books in the same universe at the time?
I didn't. Otherwise, I wouldn't have killed off the most charismatic male character. I would have had him adventuring on if I'd been thinking of it as a series. In fact, coming up with a sequel was very difficult. It gave me a lot of anxiety, let's just say, at the time. And I phoned up Mick about it and moaned to her about it all, because I was thinking, how can I write more about these people and more about this situation? Because I think I've very fed up of hearing about it. And she said not to worry at all. This always happens. Don't worry, you'll get there in the end, and so on. And I did. And the reason I did was I had what I thought was a really good idea, and that was to make the main character of the Stone Canal a very minor character in. He was a very minor character in the Star Fraction, a character called Jonathan Wild.
Yes.
I realized that Jonathan Wild, who is presented as being in his 90s or whatever in the 2040s, would be roughly the same age as me. And therefore I had my whole past to plunder.
Yeah,
to give his backstory.
I did enjoy the sort of 1970s student politics in that book. A little bit before my time, but I could empathise. In fact, I liked the way that those books are, and they're of a piece, but they're not a linear series in the way that some are. They're you could probably read them in any order, and they would all kind of coalesce as a whole as you pick the others up. I did, being a bit retentive, read them in publication order, but I imagine having done that, you could probably read them out of sequence. My favorite of the three, for what it's worth, is the Cassini Division. I like that one. Well, I like them all, but that was my favorite. So I guess you've already talked a little bit about Iain Banks, but what are some of the who I imagine was an influence on your writing? Who were some of the other key influences on your own writing? In
terms of style and theme and subject matter, actually Iain and I didn't influence each other very much. Iain was encouraged me tremendously, and he certainly read the first few of my novels in draft, as I read his. But we were both too uncritical of each other's work to be much give much useful feedback.
Right.
So I ended up getting my proper feedback from other people. Okay. As did Iain very much.
Yeah.
The influences were, I think I was, obviously, I can just go through some very obvious ones. There was Heinlein.
Yeah.
There's John Brunner. I was greatly taken with John Brunner's near future dystopias, particularly Stand on Zanzibar.
Yeah.
M. John Harrison. Now, M. John Harrison, Mike Harrison, is now well known as a writer, but to begin with, he was best known as a critic. He wrote critical articles for New Worlds, and which later became New Worlds Quarterly, which then became New Worlds more or less annual. It was a paperback series. And his criticism and John Clute's critical reviews had a tremendous impression on both me and on Iain.
Okay.
Partly because they were so scathing, and partly because they chimed with what we found dissatisfying about what was still, our favourite reading. Harrison's early works, which I later realised or learned, probably from him, were meant to be sort of trying to wring the neck of a subgenre.
Yeah.
Like The Pastel City was just trying to drive a rapier through the heart of dying Earth fantasy. Likewise, The Committed Men, Post-Nuclear Apocalypse, and best of all, I think, the
Centauri Device, perhaps.
The Centauri Device, loved it. Still love it, actually.
Yeah.
And being pretty naive, even in my 20s, I read them straight. I thought they were great. And you'll find bits of, particularly of the Star Fraction, where I sort of try to emulate Mike Harrison's style. Not a good idea. And my prose got sharpened up quite a lot when I was writing The Stone Canal. And a good friend of mine, a novelist, Andrew Gregg, who happened to be a neighbour, I gave him, I guess, the second chapter of The Stone Canal to look over. And he just went through it with a pencil, cut, and sharpened it up enormously. And he said it's like cleaning the fluff off the needle, which for younger viewers is an antique technology for reproducing sound,
I remember.
Often for music.
Yeah, I'm not that young.
And once he had shown me how to line edit, which is what the name of that skill is, I could then do it myself. And I have since then passed it on to many other people, many other aspiring writers. It's an immensely useful technique.
Okay.
Especially if you're teaching creative writing. If you sit down with I've found this. You sit down with a writer who's given you a story, to critique, and you just go through it with them line by line and with a sharp pencil. You soon find it. They soon find rather what they were really trying to say in the story.
What are you doing in that exercise? Are you sort of just removing individual words, or kind of whole passages of text, or a combination of the above, or rewording things? The whole thing, I guess.
Yeah. All of these. There are, quite often for example, Andrew found in my chapter, the chapter I'm talking about, he found some completely redundant pieces of description. And just, it was better off without them. So there you go.
All right. Science fiction these days, it's a rare breed of author that puts out standalone or singleton books, based on my own observations, and I don't claim to be an expert, that it seems to be that publishers and perhaps the authors too prefer to churn out series. It seems to be more reliable. But your back catalogue's a nice mix of both. And so I was curious, which do you prefer writing, singletons or the series or trilogies?
I much prefer writing singletons. What happened though was that after I'd written the Fall Revolution books, I had more or less settled my scores with all the themes in them, and I was looking at Iain's work, the Culture series, and I also came across a really engaging open-ended series by Lois McMaster-Bujold, the Vorkosigan books.
Oh yes, yeah, I read the first one.
Yeah, if you've read only the first one, you're missing a treat.
Yeah, well, I've got several. I can't find them now. I've moved them. They were on the shelf behind me now. But I read the first one, and it was a little bit. I'm not sure if it was the first one she wrote or if it's chronologically the first one, and it was just a little bit lovey-dovey for me, I found. But it hasn't put me off. I've got several more, so I will when I get the appropriate one to pick up with again, then I'll definitely read it.
Yeah, because the first one it's essentially a basic romance plot. Find the most dangerous man in the universe and marry him. And the following ones, the sequels, are an increasing delight.
Okay, it's good to know.
Once you get Miles himself coming on the scene, they become enormous fun. Anyway, yes. So what she had in common with Iain, very little, except the idea that if you've set up a universe, you can use it as an adventure playground. You set up the premises for your universe. In her case, it's the wormhole network, and in Iain's it was the whole gallimaufry of the culture, and it's rigorously worked out imaginary physics. And so I thought I'd try that. And I remembered a conversation I had with Iain in a lunchtime drinking session, I think it was, when we both worked in an office in London. And it was trying to come up with rationalizations for all the stupid things in the UFO mythos, like the Greys, the little grey aliens. And we figured out that the Greys had to be originally terrestrial, because it's very unlikely you'd get humanoid bipeds popping up randomly. So they could only be genetically modified dinosaur descendants of one kind or another, or at least, or perhaps even naturally evolved. And as for the gigantic cigar-shaped motherships, with flashing lights on the outside, the obvious explanation for them was that they were so gigantic because they were actually aquaria containing giant squid, and the flashing lights on the outside because squid communicate with chromatophores, changing the colours of their skin. And we had, a few laughs thinking out all that. And I thought, why not do something with this? And that became what was intended to be an open-ended series, the Engines of Light books.
Right.
But by the time I got to the third one, my own disbelief suspension was looking a bit rough. And that's
Cosmonaut Keep and Co. Is it? That's the one you?
Yeah, Cosmonaut Keep, Dark Light, and Engine City.
Yeah.
And I decided I would wrap it all up and call it a trilogy. I suppose because I wasn't writing them as a trilogy. The second book doesn't have the middle volume problem. Then I think I went on to writing near future standalones. Let me reach for a copy of one of my books, and I wrote Newton's Wake as a standalone space opera.
Yeah, I've recently read that one actually.
Oh, good. What did you think of it?
I got a little bit, and it's probably me in that I tried to read it too fast, and I had the same failing with the Centauri device actually, and I tripped over the bewildering number of factions in the book, and I could never quite remember who was which was which and what their motivations were. But yeah, I did enjoy it, but didn't totally light my fire. But yeah, I mean, I changed the screen view because I've got I think, with the exception of a short story collection from Nesfa, I think I've got everything. And my latest acquisition was the Highwaymen, just a little novella. Just I get a little bit completist sometimes with with collecting. So I've got a couple more to get. But yeah, so I think that's all the standalones. So Newton's Wake isn't on there because I haven't closed out the month yet. But yeah, then I think it was Learning the World. I think these are in order. Execution Channel, The Night Sessions, Restoration Game, Intrusion. That's probably the one that I'll read next. I like the sound of Intrusion, and then Descent. Yeah. So as you see, and thanks for buying all those books. After Newton's Wake, I wrote Learning the World actually because I had two ideas at the same moment almost. One was a one generation ship. In other words, you combine generation ships with extended lifespans. Right.
And the other was to try to write a novel that would do two things. First of all, be a novel that could be read in 100 years without knowing anything about the 20th century.
All right.
Yeah. And the other thing was to write a novel that was kind of as if the tradition of British SF from say, Wells, Stapleton, Clark, Baxter was like a straight line without any distractions of the new wave or cyberpunk or whatever.
Yeah.
And see where that would take you.
Okay.
So I've got this. It does do all these things.
And that's learning the world, did you say?
Yeah. And at that point, I had I've been doing space opera, and for long enough it seemed, and I wanted to go back to the near future and write something with about 10 years worth of accumulated indignation about the world, the way the world was going in it.
Yeah,
hence
still going.
Yeah, you got the execution channel.
So I guess since you can see them all there in front of you, or maybe you can just about see them. Of the books that you've written, do you have a favourite? Not either because you think that it's the one you think is the best written, or that you've enjoyed writing the most, or whichever your criteria.
The one I kind of like the most is the Stone Canal.
Okay.
Partly because it has quite a bit of real life, my real life in it.
Yes.
Partly because I just the structure and so on worked well in that instance. Yeah. Of my more recent books, I do like Descent a lot, and it is one that I modestly think is a bit underrated. Because people think it's about UFOs and conspiracy theories, and it's really not.
Okay, and I'm curious to know if you read much science fiction yourself, and if you do, what are I imagine you do. What are a handful of if you've read any recent science fiction books that you would recommend to others, or that you do recommend to others?
Well, that's a very painful question because I don't read enough science fiction. In fact, I don't read enough fiction, full stop. I tend to end up reading a lot of non-fiction because it's easy to pick up and put down, contains useful information. Now, my current science fiction reading I've picked up at the Orbit party last week. I picked up this book by Taddy Thompson.
Okay.
Which looks very good, and I have started reading it, and it's very well written. I've read one of his shorter books. I think it came out from Yukon Press. I got it at EasterCon, a novella, or a very short novel about African superheroes.
Okay.
And I was well impressed with Taddy Thompson and with his writing. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I recently, the last couple of years, I read The Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley
Robinson.
Yeah. I read a short novel by Justina Roberts called Paper Hearts, which I thought was brilliant. Most recent other ones that snag in the memory from the past few years are War of the Maps by Paul Macaulay.
Paul Macaulay, just as a quick aside, is another author, a British author that I'm busy acquiring every single thing that he's ever written. That you can't see them on a different shelf, but I don't have that one actually. Right,
it's very good, very intriguing setup and world building, and a page turnout of a story. In fact, my main dread when I was reading, getting near the end of War of the Maps, was thinking, oh my God, this isn't going to be the first volume of a series, is it? And then he just stuck the landing. It was perfect.
Pulled it all together. All right.
Yeah.
That one.
Yeah.
And you're keeping your hand in a little with science fiction reading, but maybe it's like I don't know, someone that makes cheese for a living. The last thing you want to do is go and eat cheese the whole time. But it's a strange analogy. But what are your thoughts if you have any on the state of science fiction these days? Is it thriving, or is it kind of heading for the exit?
Oh no, I think it is thriving in that you've got new voices coming in.
Yeah.
And you've also got what I think will be a very healthy input from China, Africa, and other countries outside the English-speaking world. I should have said that, yes, a book that I found very memorable was, of course, The Three-Body Problem.
Yeah.
Although I've read the second of the trilogy, but not the third.
I think the third one. Yeah, I think the third. I can't remember now. I read it a few years ago, but I think the third one is the one that I like the best of the three.
Is that the Dark Forest?
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, I think Dark Forest might be the second one actually.
Yeah, you're right.
Death End. This is the third one. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was long enough ago that I don't remember it all that well actually. So I should probably read it again. But it gets a mixed review. Some people think it's awesome, and other people think it's like very wooden and doesn't flow very well, or the characters are paper thin or whatever. And my reading tends to be pretty straight ahead, and if I find the story engaging, then I'm all in. And I liked it well enough to plow through all 3 books anyway.
Yeah.
Another one that I read beginning of last year, and at times felt like it was a little bit hard work, was Ada Palmer, Terra Ignota, which starts with Too Light the Lightning, and then there are another 3 even chunkier books than that. And I found the first one was fantastic, and then just very intriguing world. And then the second and third one I got pretty bogged down in, and it took me quite a while to finish them. But I just stuck with it. I did finish it, and then it pays off in the fourth, as was my feeling. I did feel like a bit of a dunce as I was reading them, because it I don't think it assumes a level of kind of classical history and literature knowledge, but I think it would help if you had that. She clearly has it, and it's threaded through the entire story. But so I did feel like I hadn't done my homework when I was reading it. I felt like I ought to be doing a detention or something. But I think again that's probably something that will reward a reread at some point. Anyway, enough about Ada Palmer. A related question: is there anyone writing science fiction now that you're particularly excited about, that you're sort of waiting for their next book to come out with bated breath? We put you on the spot.
It certainly does, because it just shows how behind my reading is. I want to read more of Taddy Thompson. I want to read more of Justina Roberts, who I've read just a few books by, and I'd like to read her earlier work, for example.
So this question was suggested by a friend of mine. So I imagine anyway that you do a fair bit of research for your books. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. You can tell me. But if so, what's the most surprising thing that you've learned during that process?
Oh gosh, that's a tricky one.
Do you do much in the way of research for your novels, or does it just come straight out of your head and onto the page?
Oh no, I do a fair bit of research. I do a lot of the flip side of not reading a lot of science fiction is I do read a fair bit of popular science.
Yeah,
and I tend to incorporate that into my stories. So, for instance, for the latest books, the latest trilogy, the Lightspeed trilogy, as the publishers are calling it, when I was while I was writing the first one, Beyond the Hallowed Sky, I had to find out about Venus. And I just had this idea that part of it was going to be set on Venus, and I'd heard about the idea of Venus cloud colonies. So I read a book, advocating Venus as a suitable place for exploratory settlement. And the surprising thing that I learned in doing that is that the most habitable part of the solar system, other than Earth, is the upper atmosphere of Venus, where the temperature is in the sort of 30 to 40 degrees Celsius range, and there's sunlight. You can float in the clouds or float above the clouds and get bowled around the planet by the prevailing winds.
That is interesting, because I would have in my ignorance would have said that Venus was very challenging because of the high pressure, the crushing pressure of the atmosphere, and the kind of general environment being certainly not habitable in the way that Edgar Rice Burroughs imagined back in the day. But so the upper atmosphere, interesting.
Yeah, because in that atmosphere, at these levels of the atmosphere, breathable air is a lifting gas.
Right.
So your habitat supports itself. It doesn't have to have balloons attached, as it were.
It reminds me a little bit of Larry Niven book called, the hell was it called? The integral trees, and then the smoke ring was the sequel, which isn't quite the same thing, but there was a sort of a band of habitable gas effectively around a planet somewhere. You mentioned your more recent book, so tell me about those. I have them. I haven't got to them yet. They were a recent acquisition, in fact, because the third one's only just come out, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Without giving anything away, obviously, what's the story arc there? What can I expect to find in that series?
The story arc is that the secret what actually got me thinking about it was some ideas for books that I'd had way back when I was a teenager or a student.
Yeah.
And that is kind of about near future FTL, which being science fiction readers we thought was entirely possible.
Yeah.
Near future FTL.
Still very popular. I did a little poll of my my what I laughingly call my audience about what science fiction tech they'd like to see actually be, and FTL was the number one choice by far. Ray guns didn't even get a look in. It was FTL that was most people wanted. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, we do. And at first I thought, well, why not write one just as if FTL was discovered like this year, but that was just too challenging because the political situation changes all the time and it's very unpredictable. So what I did as a compromise was that FTL travel was in fact discovered in 2018, which is a kind of arbitrary date which I picked because it was the date that James Blish has in his Cities in Flight novel.
Oh, really?
Which I should have named as another of my early influences. Really thoroughly enjoyed them. And it's been kept secret. And who is keeping it secret? Well, it's been kept secret by the scientists who discovered it to keep it out of the hands of people like Trump and Putin and so on.
Yeah.
And over the course of by the time you get to the 2070s, this has become a vast conspiracy. Which is still keeping it secret from most, which has infiltrated large parts of the state, like some of the armed forces and the Navy, as you'll find out. And but it's still being kept secret from the tops of the governments. So, not to mention the general public. So the starting point of the story is this young, although she doesn't know it, mathematical genius, Lakshmi Nayak, who is studying in London in the late 2060s. Gets an airmail letter that appears to have been written by herself from a place where she has never been.
Right.
And has a series of equations written in the way that she would write, with little scribbles and dotted lines and obviously therefore and so on, but which end up with an equation which seems completely impossible because it implies faster than light travel.
Yeah.
And she checks it through and through and tidies up the proof, and it all seems to work. And against the advice of her supervisor, she puts it up on Physics X Archive, the pre-publication portal.
Yeah.
And it gets duly torn to shreds. But it draws the attention of a very suave but sinister character called Marcus Owen, who essentially warns her off the field entirely by pointing out that other people who've published in this area have come to swift and sticky ends.
Oh dear. Okay.
Yes.
We've been silenced.
Yes. So she panics and defects from England to Scotland. England and Scotland in this future are in two quite different power blocks. England is in the Alliance and Scotland is in the Union. The Union was established in the 2030s, I think 2030s or 2040s, by a continent-wide uprising across what used to be the European Union.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a constituent assembly and embarked upon a new stage. So
it's a little bit terrifying. It's a little bit terrifying to think that the 2030s, which sounds like stupendously far in the future, it's like in 10 minutes.
Yes, I know. Yes. Well, perhaps someday it'll make an amusing alternate history.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Anyway, yes.
Yeah. So there's that strand of the story, and the other strand are set among people who know what's going on, including a biologist on an extrasolar planet her name is Emma Hazeldine, and she is investigating, along with a team of others, a mysterious rock formation which seems to have things going on inside the rock that are incomprehensible, where the rock formation turns out to be part of a vastly extended alien artificial intelligence of some kind. And the rest of the stories are sort of spinning out from that. So, yeah, you've got a starship built in Port Glasgow.
Fantastic. I Yeah, I do like the sound of that. I've just chosen my books to read for the next month, and I do it. There's a random element in that process, and the Ken MacLeod shelf unfortunately didn't come up in that process, so I didn't get to choose it. But perhaps next time, maybe I'll choose it as one of my wild card picks. Yeah, well, I've got a fair bit of your work to get through at some stage. As I said, I've read the full Revolution, the original 3, and but I confess, so far that's it. I've recently acquired the others, so they're all there for me to read now. So what's next? I guess you'd have finished the third of those books, which only come out just now, and I don't think is even out in the US yet, but soon. But you'll have finished that some time back, presumably the way the publishing industry works. So you'll already be working on the next thing, I imagine, or are you having a bit of a break?
I'm having a bit of a pause, but I have pitched the next book to my publisher, and they seem interested.
Okay.
Well, they are interested, and I'm kind of doing some preparatory research for that and making notes. So I've kind of started on it.
Okay.
And
okay.
It's another space opera, but not.
Job.
But I have told myself not a trilogy. It might be become a series if I'm lucky, but not a trilogy.
Okay. Good. I do like me a bit of space opera. All right. So then you've got the Hugos coming up fast. When is that? Is in what, August time? Is it?
Yeah.
Ken, thank you very much for your time, and much appreciated. That's brilliant. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, John, and it's very much appreciated getting on your show.
Yeah.
I don't actually get on very many, so thank you very much.
Right, fantastic. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your holiday, and I will look forward to reading what comes next, and the other like umpteen books that I haven't quite got to yet.
Thanks. Have a good day.
See you later.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye bye.